The following is a live recording of the webinar that took place on June 22, 2017, where I demonstrate the use of the Essential Safe Assessment tool. We'll talk about what I call the 10 deal breakers of scaling Agile, and we'll also look at a few commercial tools for conducting assessments of larger scale. Enjoy. We're looking at the 10 what I call the 10 deal breakers. So if you're not doing these well, or if you're not doing them at all, you're really going to have a hard time scaling any kind of agility. And so our approach is, let's look at what are these 10 essential elements, and we want to know how well are we doing in these 10 areas. Okay, so what we're going to do is come up with a scorecard for our organization. And what we're trying to do is say, how well are we doing in each of these areas, and we want to end up with some kind of a scorecard. And this is what I'm showing you right now is a blank one. And when we're done with this exercise, we're going to end up with something like this, right? Which shows how well are we doing in each of these areas. And the way we're going to approach this is we're going to give ourselves 5 out of 5 in each area to start with. And then as we go through one by one, each category one by one, we're going to deduct 1 point for any negative symptom that we see. Okay, so when we do the first couple of these categories, you'll see exactly where I'm going. But that's the approach that we're taking in doing this simple assessment. So the very first category is applying lean agile principles. Right, so notice I'm saying applying, not just knowing. So how well are we applying these lean agile principles? And what we're talking about here is, are we applying systems thinking across a value stream? Do we even have a concept of a value stream? Or do we just have a bunch of teams that are writing code? Right, and then are we building incrementally with fast integrated learning cycles? And by the way, guys, I'm not going to read every bullet point, but just this first one, I think we should kind of go through it a little slowly. And what we're doing here is trying to make sure that we're not only understanding the principles but applying them. And so some of the negative things that come up, negative symptoms come up that in organizations that are not applying these principles, is they're getting these types of behaviors. Right. So for instance, look at the fourth one down, right? Agile practices are carried out on top of a wrong mindset. Right. So for instance, they're having daily stand-ups, but it's really kind of a status report for the manager. Right. Or they're having retrospectives, but nobody says anything. Or when the team says, what's wrong and the things that need to be fixed that are out of their control, nobody in management seems to care or does anything about it. Right. So those are some of the symptoms that when we see them, we go, okay, it looks like we're paying lip service to Agile, but we're not really doing it. So when we start seeing any of these symptoms, we want to put a check mark by that box, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to put a check mark, let's say here and here. Right. And so the way that we're going to run this evaluation is that since we started with 5 out of 5 in this category, anytime we see a checkbox, we deduct from that, right? So in this case, it'll be 5 minus 2, so we would give ourselves a 3 in that category, right? So it's just a very simple way to get started. Okay, and then the next area is, do you have Agile teams and release trains? Right, and so the idea here is that, do you have a release train, meaning it's a program that's based on a value stream? Do you have a value stream that's well understood? And is your release train made up of people that are part of that value stream, that not just engineering, not just testing, but across the entire business? And then in addition to that, do you have dedicated teams that are executing that value stream? Right, that's a really, really important concept if you want to be able to scale. And so that's the question. And then some of the negative symptoms we see if we don't have Agile teams and we don't have Agile release trains, is that we see that teams are isolated and struggle to deliver customer value. We see too many dependencies, right? So each team, in order for them to get one thing of value out to the customer, they're dependent on 4 other teams. And there tends to be this one shared services team that everybody's dependent on, so you get these bottlenecks, right? So each of these we go through and say, do we see that in our organization, right? And so if we do, we put a check mark next to that. So yeah, we see too many dependencies, right? So if I was doing this, I would put that. If I was doing this on behalf of one of my clients, I would go through and definitely say that they see too many dependencies. And the next category is cadence and synchronization. Do they have a cadence? In other words, do they get all the teams together on a regular basis and do their planning together, right? So that one I'm gonna skip. But there's also a set of check marks with that go with that. And critical roles, I'm going to skip that as well. But I do want to stop on this PI planning one. So the PI planning, or in some organizations they call it big room planning. This is one of the seminal events of the Scale Agile framework and also the other scaling frameworks. This is one where that you really can't shortchange. And I see companies doing it a lot, but this is where the entire team, all the stakeholders, all the engineering teams, test, shared services, basically the entire value stream gets together and plans for a period of time. Usually it's between 8 to 14 weeks. A lot of companies will standardize on 10 weeks or 12 weeks, but then they do this planning on a cadence. And it's really, really important to do this in a disciplined manner, because this is where the entire value stream gets organized around a common mission. And that common mission concept is extremely important, because without a common mission, each team basically works on whatever they want or whatever their product owner wants. And so we want to make sure that the entire value stream knows exactly what the objectives are for them. Now, the symptoms we see when we don't have this PI planning or big room planning is the following, the 5 that you're looking at. And I would say that the one that I see quite a bit is this third one, lack of trust between stakeholders and teams. So what happens is stakeholders see, like 120 people, and they're going, gosh, how come it's so hard to get any kind of value out when we got so many people, we got such a huge payroll? And it's not until they participate, they roll up their sleeves and participate in the planning, that they see all the interdependencies, they see all the technical debt, right? And then number 2 is also a big one. Demand doesn't match capacity. So teams are just told what to do, and there's a long laundry list of features that they have to produce, but nobody really knows, do we even have the capacity to do all this? Do we know what our current work in progress is? What is our backlog today? What I find is everybody has their own idea of what the current work in progress is. And so when you do this big room planning, everything becomes transparent. And so that's why it's really, really important to do this. And some of the reasons that companies stop doing this or don't do this is, there's, people think of the cost, right? We're going to get all these people into one room, and we have to fly them in from remote places, very, very costly. We might have to, rent out a big auditorium. But the truth is that you save all kinds of time by doing this 2 days of planning up front, because that, by doing this level of planning all concentrated in 2 days, and everybody you need is within line of sight, you avoid the need for, dozens and dozens of meetings that are really hard to plan, because you need to have a quorum in these meetings, and everybody's on different vacation plans. So this is, again, can't underscore this enough, the importance of PI planning. And then the next area to me is a deal breaker is a system demo or an integrated demo, right? So we know that in Scrum, Scrum prescribes that you have a demo or a sprint review at the end of a 2-week iteration. Well, for when you're trying to scale Agile, you got to have the similar concept, but at a higher level of abstraction, right? So you want to be able to demonstrate the entire solution, the work of multiple teams. And that's what the system demo is. And so you want to be able to demonstrate, what are some of the features that we've built, some of the features that stakeholders have asked for. And we want to do that at the end of every iteration, right? So this seems kind of scary at first because development teams are used to, kind of developing in their own silos and then integrating when they get close to delivering the full solution. Well, there's all kinds of problems that happen when teams, are in their own bubble and everything works, but then when they go to integrate, nothing works, right? So that's something that I've seen in the 6 years I've been doing a lot of coaching. Is I tell teams, no, you have to break that siloed concept. You have to break out of your own sandbox and start integrating early. And when you don't do this, these are some of the symptoms that we see. Teams start to waterfall within the PI, right? So if your PI or if your program increment is, let's just say 12 weeks, teams will spend the first iteration in analysis, and then the second and third iteration in writing code, and then they don't even start testing until the third and fourth iteration, and they run into problems too late, right? So what we want to do is have those milestones within the PIs so that teams are demonstrating their work at the end of every iteration. So they demonstrate the team's work at the end of each iteration, and then they check in their work and build a solution that they deploy to staging. And the other thing that does is it uncovers all kinds of DevOps issues, right? So for instance, they discover that, our staging environment really isn't set up. The libraries, the hardware really isn't set up. And they also discover how difficult it is, or it can be, to deploy their solution to a staging environment, and how time consuming it is. And so what that gives them insight into is, all of maybe the work they didn't know they had to do, right? They discovered that work much earlier. And the other thing that happens if you don't do this is it gives you this last one, which is a false sense of progress or false velocity, right? When you don't do these system demos, you have a tendency to think, well, everything's working in my little bubble or my sandbox, so we're making really, really good progress. Whereas the reality is, you have no idea if your portion of the solution is going to work once you integrate with the main line of code. So that's the importance of the system demo. And so, by the way, all of these concepts we're covering, if you haven't heard of them before, like we're covering a lot of concepts here. I have a class that's coming up that I wanted to let you guys know about. And the class is going to be in Irvine on August 15th through 18th. And we get into all the nuts and bolts of SAFe and all of the agility issues with skilling. So basically, a lot of the things that we're talking about today, we go much, much deeper in.
So Armin, can I ask you
Sure.
a couple questions? Folks are asking them around 4.0 versus 4.5.
Oh, okay.
I noticed that you say 4.5. They're wondering if what should they train on and what's the big difference? I think you covered this at the beginning, but could you?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll go. In fact, Donna, maybe it'd be helpful if we just go to the website.
Sure, I love it.
Yeah, so let's just go to the website and take a look at what we have in 4.5. So this is, as you can see here, I'm showing, www.scaleagileframework.com. It was updated yesterday. And so the first time you go in, this is the view you're going to see, which is the the portfolio view. The first time you go in, this is what you'll see. And this is the portfolio view or three-level safe that we're all used to. But the approach that they've taken now is, if you look at essential safe, which is the diagram that I showed earlier, this is sort of the essential, the bare bones, the basics of safe. And what they've done is they said, okay, there is essential safe, and then there is its big brother, large solution safe, right? And so these are the two main configurations, and then each of these configurations come with a flavor that has a portfolio, right? So essential safe with a portfolio is portfolio safe. Okay, large scale or large solution safe with a portfolio becomes full safe. Okay, so it's really two configurations, and then each of them with their respective portfolio.
So I think when we got a question on how do we decide whether to train folks on 4.0 versus 4.5, and this is just safe, is you have to decide what's the model you're going to follow, and then you make that decision. Right now, everything is 4.0, and if you want to move things and configure it and figure out what things I should add and where for your specific program, that's where you want to look at 4.5, the configurability.
Yeah, really, I mean, everybody should be looking to stay current. I mean, there's really I don't see any reason anybody should want to stay with 4.0. Other than logistical reasons. If you've already got the posters and training and everything, you want to be careful not to, constantly throwing new things at people. But really, not a whole lot has changed, if you ask me, between 4.0 and 4.5. It's just really the cosmetics. And I mean, these are important cosmetics. But what's really what we heard from the field a lot was that people were confused with the big diagram with all the icons, and a lot of people just didn't even have a portfolio, right? So if you're let's say a defense contractor, you may have a very large program, right? You may have a large solution, but really it's just that one solution that you're working on, and you're going to be working on it for the next 5 years, right? So you really don't have any portfolio concerns. And
no, that really helps. I think that really helps.
Yeah, people were getting confused about, well, what about this portfolio? And then they have to be told, well, actually, we just have one solution, so we don't really need the portfolio. And so it was creating a lot of confusion around that.
Got it. Now, one other question is you spent a lot of time on the big meeting, and everybody's asking a lot of questions about that. And so the big question coming from everyone is, do we really need to have a big meeting with everybody in the room to do scaled? Why do we need to do that?
Yeah, so the reason that's important is a couple of things. One is that there are lots and lots of dependencies in large scale implementations. So there, in other words, teams don't know what other teams are dependent on them, and they don't often know if the teams that they're dependent on have the capacity to meet their dependencies, right? So you get this chicken and the egg issue when you're trying to plan, and if you just assume that, well, we're depending on this API team to add a parameter to this call, and they're going to do that. And then it turns out that, there's 40 other teams that have the similar kind of dependencies on the API team, but they don't discover that until, commitments have been made, right? And so what we want to do is get everybody in the room and settle all those dependencies, right? So the benefit of having everybody in the room is that everybody's line of sight. If you have if you're dependent on another team, you just walk over and you walk over to that team and you say, hey, we have a dependency on you. Can you meet that dependency? And they'll give you an answer, right? They might say, no, we're actually already over capacity. So right away that feature that where you have a dependency on another team, either you have to take that on and build it yourself, or you have to come up with a workaround, or you have to maybe negotiate with the team that got their dependencies in first, and that issue has to get escalated to their management, and maybe it creates more capacity for that API team so that they can meet your dependency, right? So these are very complicated issues. That's why large scale planning, if you don't do it this way, can literally take months because everyone's uncertain, right? And they keep having meetings and to discover what all the dependencies are. And so if you have everybody in the same room, it takes 2 days of effort, but at the end of it, you come up with a plan that everybody's comfortable with.
That's great. Thanks, Armin.
Sure. Yeah. So this one is, at first it's like 2 days that we didn't have to put in, but if you actually add up all the time that you do put in, people discovered that it's actually a lot more than 2 days that they're doing today. Right. It's just spread out.
Absolutely. And guys, I'll tell you, I was on a team that had 30 teams, and we did not do this at the beginning, even though I tried to promote it, and they said, no, teams will just work it out on their own. I promise you, they don't work it out on their own, and there's always going to be conflicts. This planning session makes sure that everyone commits to something that can be done instead of 30 teams committing to something and, over half of them are going to fail their commit because they didn't really work together. So
yeah, Donna. So another thing, and I think we should move on after
Sure.
this is teams. We talk about self-organized teams in Agile and how important that is, and that is truly important. But one of the things that I've seen is when you have a group of teams, right? So in other words, you mentioned 30 teams. 30 teams tend not to self-organize. Right, so self-organizing between teams takes a little more work, right? So this is where I think program managers add a lot of value.
Yep.
Right, because teams tend to actually become competitive, is what I've seen. Each team wants to make sure they get their commitment met, and so you need sort of a program management that oversees that value stream that we've been talking about and ensures that the value stream is what gets priority, not each individual team's needs. Right. So this is kind of something that's new to scaling, is that now you have to actually oversee and provide guidance, and that's really what leadership is all about. So that each team can do its best work and at the same time be able to provide the value that the value stream needs.
Thanks, Armin. That was great.
Okay, cool. So system demo we covered. So the other thing I want to cover is this number 8, which is the innovation iteration. This is another one. Donna, I don't know what your experience has been, but with the clients that I have, they really struggle with why should they dedicate one iteration every PI to innovation, right? It's really innovation and planning. But what we encourage people to do is, reserve this time at the last iteration of your PI to innovation and planning. Well, the planning everybody understands, right? If they bought off on SAFe, they understand that they have to dedicate 2 days to planning. But the innovation portion of this sprint or iteration is also super important, because if we don't reserve the time for this, it doesn't happen. Right. What we've seen is that innovative companies that, see themselves as innovators in the field, right? They come up with smart devices, Internet of Things, and so forth, machine learning. But I would say 90% of their time is spent fighting fires, supporting current customers. And if they just leave innovation to when they have time, it doesn't happen. Right, so we want to make sure that we reserve time in the iteration for purely innovation types of events. Example of that would be like a 2-day hackathon, right? And or maybe a 4-day proof of concept. I've seen other companies also do things like if they have some really difficult defect, or they have some serious performance issues, they'll put up a contest and say, okay, the team that can solve this problem will get, movie tickets or something like that. And they make it really, really fun. And there's actually some really good videos on YouTube about companies that do these hackathons and how much fun they have. I mean, it makes you want to be young and get out there and be an engineer again. But that's what this this innovation planning is. And if we don't do these things, these are some of the symptoms that we see. Is that look at number 4, people burn out. Right. So one of the things about iterative development is that, there's very little slack in the system anymore. Right. So you go from one iteration to the next, to the next, to the next, and it can start to feel like you're in one of those hamster wheels. And if there's really no time to where you say, okay, I'm working really hard right now, but after we finish this iteration, we've got this hackathon coming up, and I've got all kinds of ideas on how we're going to approach that, right? That just infuses a lot of energy and creativity into a team that's maybe been on a hamster wheel for a while. So this IP iteration is absolutely critical. And of course, the other thing is, when we don't do these things, the other thing that we will see is that lack of delivery capacity buffer. In other words, that 2 weeks where you don't really plan anything also acts as a buffer in case there are overruns in certain feature development, right? So again, we want to assume that people are coming up with estimates for their work, but at the same time, we want to be realistic and say, hey, we don't hit those 100%. So let's just leave a 2-week buffer where we're going to do innovation. We're also going to do things like tie up loose ends that didn't get tied up within the iterations that the work was planned. Because if we don't do that, we're going to have this technical debt that keeps rolling over from one PI to the next. It kind of like snowballs, right? So there's many reasons why we want to have this innovation and planning iteration within every PI.
Well, Armin, would you agree? I know you've worked on a lot of scaled projects. They tend to be longer, and so that's why you get this burnout. When you have 30 teams, that's not a 3-week project. It's a 3-year project, and so it's really important to plan that out.
And I'll tell you, my brother works for Disney, and they have this innovation. They do hackathons. Now, they do it every other PI, right? So if you can't sell this idea to do it every PI, well, maybe you can sell it every other PI. And for them, my brother looks forward to this like months in advance, right? So he's already planned what he's going to work on this hackathon, who he's going to work with, and it's kind of always in the back of his mind. Right, it's kind of like this pet project that he's always, ruminating on, and it puts that extra motivation in your tank, right, to have this kind of a time where you're going to be doing this hackathon, and also getting the recognition, right? I mean, this is what engineers live for. So yeah, this is super important, and then the last couple of things I was going to work on, let's do the leadership first. And so the leadership part of this is also very important. Now, we mentioned the importance of Agile principles, applying those principles. The leadership, we have it as a separate category because it's more than just applying the principles. It's actually having leaders that understand what their role is within this Agile space, right? So they're no longer telling people what to do. They're no longer tasking people. So what is their role? And that becomes an important part of making this scaling successful. So for one thing, I've never seen a large-scale Agile implementation succeed without a Lean Agile Center of Excellence. Right. So what is this team? So, the acronym is called LACE. So the LACE team is a group of of leaders, managers and leaders, that their highest priority is rolling out this scaled agile implementation, right? So they're looking at, implementing, what kind of training do we need? What kind of tools do we need, right? So for instance, are we going to use Excel spreadsheets? Are we going to use Post-its, right? There's a lot of logistics that go into doing a successful rollout of SAFe or any kind of large scale model. Where are we going to meet? And, even this assessment that we're talking about, right? What kind of assessment are we going to do? How often are we going to do it, right? You really need a team that's focused on the successful implementation. So I've seen companies that do a successful implementation in like a year, year and a half, and they'll have 500 people doing SAFe. And I have another client that was one of the early pioneers, and they've been doing SAFe for 7 years, and they are struggling in many of these areas, right? And it all comes down to they don't have a dedicated Lean Agile Center of Excellence, right? The ones that don't succeed, the ones that are just, floundering, they don't have a team that's focused on it, right? Everybody's doing their own version of SAFe, right? And that actually, even though we want to give teams freedom, we also want to have areas of commonality so that teams can interact, right? A good example is, what kind of tool do you use? I mentioned, do you use sticky notes or Excel, or do you standardize on a industrial scaled agile tool like a version 1 or a AgileCraft, right? And these are very expensive implementations that have a lot of value. So you need to cost justify it. You need to provide training to people. If you don't have this team, this Lean Agile Center of Excellence, these things kind of fall by the wayside, right? You'll find that one team uses Jira, another one uses Excel spreadsheets, and then they wonder why they can't communicate their plans with each other. So
Hey,
a lot
Ron,
of value.
who do you normally see on a Center of Excellence?
So you see, basically what you want to do is you want to get people from within that value stream, right? So you want to see people from QA, you want to see people from PMO, but from a leadership point of view, I found that this is a great role for the PMO, right? So in a lot of organizations now they're changing the name to Agile PMO, right? Because the
Yeah.
PMO can be your best friend or it could be your number one enemy, right? Anytime you're rolling out SAFe or any kind of scaling, you really want them to lead the effort and not just kind of follow begrudgingly, right? That's an anti-pattern where the PMO is not bought in, right? So they require people to fill out all the time cards and all of the non-agile ways of doing things persist along with the agile things, right? So people are confused, like, why are we still doing this, right?
Yep.
So we really want the PMO to lead. And again, my clients that have been successful with SAFe, the PMO is always in the lead. And they organize the training. I mean, you really think about it, they're the best qualified to do this, right? They come from that background of making, being accountable for programs, understanding the cost and the ROI, and also being very detailed oriented when it comes to things like providing the right training to the right people and so forth. So I like to see them in the lead.
Thanks. That was perfect. I see the same thing.
Yeah, and then look at the last one, right? If you have leaders that, right, if the people are discouraged to experiment, right? So in other words, you say, hey, we're agile, but hey, you better not make a mistake because, we're counting the beans that this is costing us, right? You're basically talking out of both sides of your mouth, and we don't want to see that, right? We want to see leaders that are consistent. They say what they mean, and they've been trained themselves. They've bought in to these lean agile concepts, and they're very experiment friendly. They're highly they're highly forgiving of people that took risks and the risks failed, and they're always learning, right? They're not seeing learning as an expense. They're seeing experimentation, learning. These things are all part of a learning organization, right? So we want to have that mindset. So we get to grade here, like what are some of these symptoms we're seeing, because we want to also grade our leadership. And I would say this is foundational. Even though it's number 10, it's probably the most important of all of these things that, if we had to rank at an importance level. Right. So we've kind of been through the 10 categories. And if we look at what happens next, right? So we end up with, we started out with this clean slate. We gave everybody a 5, and then we deducted 1 point for every negative symptom that we saw in each category. So we end up with something like this, right? And so what some people like to do is they'll take this and they want to create an at a glance. This to me is at a glance, but there's different ways of showing it too. This is another one. This is a radar chart, which is very easy to do in Excel. And so at a glance, we can see that we're doing pretty good in those areas where the red line is on the edges, right? So we've got our critical roles, we've got our cadence and synchronization. We do a pretty good job of PI planning, but look at where we are with our IP iteration. It's non-existent, right? And our architecture runway is also poor, and our leadership is, maybe you started out with the COE, leadership, but that got disbanded due to, other projects coming up and whatnot. And so immediately we see where we need to focus, right? We don't need to focus on the roles. We got that taken care of. We need to focus on creating that leadership, that Lean Agile leadership group, center of excellence. We need to resurrect our IP iteration, and we're also not doing too well in those system demos, right? So if you have Agile coaches, if you have managers that are acting as coaches, this is great information for them to see where they need to focus on.
This is really good, Armin. Can you talk a little bit about who conducts the assessment and how often they should do it?
Yeah, so who conducts it? So I would say to start out with, again, to keep things simple, if you already have a Lean Agile Center of Excellence, that might be a good place to start, because these are things that are, the Lean Agile Center of Excellence would already understand, right? They've participated in the PI plannings. They know the culture of their company. So they could maybe take the first pass at it just to get, kind of a place to start. But I would say then we want to move this down to the leadership of each of the value streams, right? So we want the roles at the value stream level. You want to get also the scrum masters and the product owners, the product managers, your release train engineers, and shared services leaders, right? So you want to kind of get that leadership of that implementation team involved in that. Some companies even have, they'll use SurveyMonkey and send it out to everybody that's participating. So you mentioned 30 teams. Everybody gets to have a voice, right? And so that gets a little bit more logistically difficult to do that. So that's why I like to start out with this center of excellence. Let's start there and then kind of expand that circle. Now, as far as how often, quarterly is a good way to go. Yeah, so one way to use these results, again, some of this is there's so much low-hanging fruit, right? So the first time you do an assessment like this, you'll find that it's like, okay, this isn't telling us anything new. We already knew that we don't have this Lean Agile Center of Excellence. We already knew we're not doing the IP iteration. So a lot of this stuff you already know how to handle, right? And for instance, if you don't have a Center of Excellence, well, let's form one. That would be the action, the corrective action plan for that. But once teams get a lot, more mature, it's not so easy to know that, are we fixing the symptom or are we actually fixing the root cause? So that actually requires a little more work, Donna, to actually get to the root cause of, for instance, you may have a lean agile center of excellence, but it's really not benefiting the company. It's not benefiting the organization. Well, why is that? Right? We want to get to the root cause, and that's kind of beyond the scope of this webinar. But there are books out there. If you look up root cause analysis, there's a whole method to that. In fact, if we may choose to do another webinar where we focus just on root cause analysis and coming up with a corrective action plan. That'll take up a whole webinar. But that would be the next thing, right, is to take this and facilitate a root cause analysis workshop with these leaders and come up with a hypothesis on what that root cause is, and then come up with a corrective action plan to eradicate that root cause.
Okay. Well, I know you've got some other drawings. This is just one simple example. You want to show that?
Yeah. So the assessment that I've just been showing you is like I said, is the most simple one, a little more complex and a little more robust than the one that you just saw. Is this one that's a self-assessment. This one comes from Scaled Agile, and this becomes available to SPCs. So if there's any SPCs on the call, you have access to this as part of what's called the launch kit. So if you're an SPC, you can download this launch kit. It's a set of Excel spreadsheets. In fact, I'm going to show it to you. So it's an Excel spreadsheet that you can, let me get this one. So it's a self-assessment. And so you just basically go through and answer these questions. Give yourself a score. Each program member gives themselves a score, and then we aggregate those. And so very similar is these different area: planning readiness, PI planning event, PI execution, right? It's more fine-grained. So for instance, for PI execution, we want to know, are Scrum of Scrums meeting routinely? Is the scope appropriately managed? Is the RT effective in facilitating, right? So it's much more fine-grained. And then we go down into stakeholder engagement, portfolio alignment, right? And so then we get a radar chart based on that, right? So this one is available to SPCs that are in good standing. I'm going to show you another one, which is something that is available for purchase by a company called Agility Health. And now this is kind of the most complex that I've seen. It's also available online. I think they have a mobile application as well. So that this is great if you've got teams that you want all of them to participate, right? So I'll kind of show you a bigger one so you can see it better. So this one I'm going to show you is called Team Health. And the Team Health one, let me make this bigger. The Team Health one does a survey, and people can answer this on their mobile phones or on the web, where it's tracking things like, how is the clarity of your work? How would you assess the performance of your team? What about the leadership? What about the culture? And then what about the foundational aspects, right? So, and then it gets all these data points and it creates a dashboard so that, if you're part of the Lean Agile Center of Excellence, for instance, you can view this and kind of get a pulse on how all the teams, right, all 30 of your teams, Donna, are feeling about the health, right, of how the health of the Agile program.
I think these are really great. They're not free, but there's a reason why maybe as you're growing and scaling teams that you might not be getting better as good as you were hoping for. And there's a lot of elements that go into making good scaled agile teams. And so I think that's the big thing I'm taking away, Armin, is there's a lot of
Hmm.
elements to this. It's not just simple, go in and coach one team. There's a lot more dynamics going on as soon as you start scaling.
Yeah, absolutely. And these assessments are helpful. They kind of tell you where you should concentrate because you really don't have a lot of, first of all, you don't have a lot of coaching resources, and also you might get, 1 hour every iteration with one team. You want to make sure you're focused on the right areas, right? So that's where these assessments are invaluable.
I think that's great. So we have about 5 minutes left. I haven't seen any new questions come in. So you guys, if you have any questions, go ahead and type and Armin will wrap up and I'll ask him questions. So maybe go to the next couple slides.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, don't forget about the class. And here's your PDU information. So I think most of the questions came around, PI planning and why do we have to do that? Um, but where are you guys seeing some of your pain in your scaled agile attempts? Share that with us and I'll share it with Armin and see if he has a comment about it. SEUs, I don't know what an SEU is.
Oh yeah, I know what that is. That's an agile, it's kind of, so PDUs are for PMI.
Right.
Is it SEU?
Yep.
That's for the Scrum Alliance.
Oh, they added that. Okay. Do you want to comment about the new RTE class at all?
Oh yeah. So the new RTE class is, I think, one of the best things that Scaled Agile's come up with as far as a certification program. In fact, so I teach these SPC classes, and so one of my questions was, well, what's the difference between these two? And I did a podcast on it to clarify, but just the short of it is that the SPC class is for the change agents, right? So if you're going to be a scaled agile coach or a trainer, or part of that COE, Lean Agile COE. This is the SPC course. That's what it's designed for. But if you're going to be an RTE, right, if you're going to be much more tactical and running a train, and you want to know the DevOps, you want to know what are the meetings, what are the best ways to run the meetings, and even these assessments that we just discussed for your train. The RTE class is all about that, right? Those things are not covered in the SPC course. So we get into things like DevOps. We get into things like, for instance, cumulative flow diagrams, how to look at those and figure out whether your train is in trouble, and then how to come up with a corrective action plan based on what you see in those cumulative flow diagrams. A lot of good stuff like that, right? It's a 3-day class, and it's highly, highly interactive, right? So you're constantly learning from other RTEs that are taking that class on how they, like for instance, I took the class and I learned about this agility health from a couple of people in the class that were using it, right? I also learned about using Google Forms, right? So you can use SurveyMonkey, but Google Forms is actually also really, really good for taking large surveys and be able to, kind of accumulate all that and, make it all available on the web.
Thank you. That's great. So RTE, the class, you guys, PM, Scrum Masters, coaches out there, now you know which class you should go to. And, I've known Armin for way more years than probably your children are alive, but I think that he brings a lot to the table and he's focused his efforts on training, so he gets exposure to a lot of different stuff. So I know that he's going to provide his email. So if you guys ask questions, I think he's open to you sending them his way.
Absolutely, yeah. So my email is going to be was on that earlier slide, that first slide. Feel free to email me. I'm on LinkedIn. I would say the RTE class, I'm going to offer that also later this year, probably in San Diego. I haven't closed on that yet. I'm looking for, if your company actually wants to sponsor it, that's another thing I'll put out is if your company sponsors SPC class, a leading safe class, or an RTE class, in return, I offer 2 free seats. So if that's of interest to you, let me know as well.
That's a great deal. Okay, well, thank you, Armin, so much, and everybody for attending.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, everybody.
Well, have a great day, folks. We'll talk to you next time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Be sure to check out the show notes for a link to the slides of this presentation and ways to get a hold of me if you have additional questions. And please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. I'm Armin Merabian with Portofino Media, and thanks for spending this time with me.